Louise is a fat cow with piss holes for eyes who thinks it's okay to rip off hard-working tradespeople. Don't be like Louise. Okay, wait, let me rewind and preface this by saying this isn't a viewer query being instantly answered, which was the original point of this type of fast-paced and direct video, desperately aimed at attracting a more youthful audience than all you regular old hack subscribers who will be dead soon. Yeah, you know who you are, assholes. Instead, it's a true story that happened to me, and which I want to get off my manly and just the right amount of hairy chest, because frankly, like those hairs, this kind of caper gets on my tits. In June 2023, Nigel and I were tasked to undertake a job by Nick the landscaper. Despite that sounding like the moniker of a Cockney villain in a Guy Ritchie film who slices up people's faces with razor blades, Nick is, disappointingly and rather boringly, actually a landscaper who designs water features and rolls out astroturf for lazy twats who think green plastic is somehow an acceptable design choice over actual grass. Nonetheless, Nick, whom we do occasional work for, required us to relocate an exterior socket at Louise's home in Staverton, a pretty and affluent Northamptonshire village. Louise obviously isn't short of a few banknotes sporting the King's Head, considering the location of her dwelling, and how much she must spend on packets of quavers. And Northamptonshire isn't an area the like of Nigel and I tend to frequent, as it's out of our postcode area, and isn't known for its low-cost alcohol, and the very willing skanky hookers we tend to prefer. I mean, it's hardly Nuneaton or Bedworth here. Nonetheless, we look after Nick the landscaper whenever he needs us to work our electrical magic on his customer's private personal area, and if that happens to be in leafy Staverton, then so be it. In this case, the job was straightforward and didn't take long. Relocate an existing exterior socket on an outside wall so that it wouldn't brush against an erection Nick's got hard wood for. Don't get excited, I'm talking about a pergola, you perverts, not the kind of wood you've got in mind. Anyway, the job clocked in at less than a ton financially, which is an absolute fucking bargain considering there were two of us on site and Louise's house was out of our usual area. But at the risk of tediously repeating myself, we look after the clients of our partner trades, which is why people like Nick the landscaper, Mark the builder, Scotty the short-ass gnome plasterer, Vince the bastard, and Phil the fucking plumber entrust us to do the do time and again when it comes to their own customers. In this case, Nick's portly client Louise presented a persona I perceived as potentially problematic in the period of our presence. A piercing peak in personality perhaps betrayed a peevishness of her paying anything pertaining to our particular juju, preferentially priced or not, and perhaps that's understandable. She possibly presumed Nick's pricing for the pretty planting and pergola precluded ponying up pounds and pennies potentially proffered by people parachuted in pertaining to professional works. Profuse apologies for the heavy P in the prior paragraph. I've had a few too many Strongbow at this point, and my mind is elsewhere. Now, I don't know what formal agreement Nick had with Louise, but he'd obviously found a rare window where the stuffed sow wasn't busily shoveling Kellogg's Frosties into her cake hole, and he'd cleared it with her that he needed us in for whatever specialist sorcery was now required, whether such work was anticipated by either party or not, and that we would be invoicing the jowly hamster-faced witch directly for our expertise. As it transpired, it took less than an hour to shift her shonky weather-worn socket to where it needed to be, including the appropriate testing to provide a minor work certificate, which duly landed in Louise's engorged inbox alongside the invoice on 12th of July. Annoyingly, it was ignored. Maybe there were crumbs lodged into her keyboard or something at the time, so a payment reminder went out on 19th of July as the fucking mouth breather still hadn't stumped up requisite recompense over a week from her having completed the job to her satisfaction. Think of it this way, when Louise takes her Range Rover to the garage for yet another electrical fault, presumably she coughs up for the work done before the grease monkeys and spanner grabbers allow her to pootle off. It's the same when she waddles off to Waitrose to stock up on dietary essentials such as tins of Twiglets and bags of giant Watsits. One presumes she doesn't crab walk past the till and security guard, who is busily wondering where the fuck his life went wrong, without actually opening her purse and rummaging through the Greggs, McDonald's and Noodle Plus loyalty cards to find a debit payment they'll actually accept. Other businesses don't offer interest-free credit for goods and services rendered without prior agreement, but Louise believes I do because, well, I don't know why. I mean, we did what was asked of us when it was asked of us, so please, Louise, put down the oversized lollipop you're tonguing and for fuck's sake pay it when the invoice smashes into your inbox. Thankfully, on 20th July 2023, Louise woke up, belched loudly, dusted the sugar and crumbs off her credit card, and proceeded to settle the bill in full. Wunderbar! Done, dusted, jobbed, shit, shat. So long, lard ass. Nearly a year later, in June 2024, I was surprised to find Louise putting down a fistful of biscuits for just long enough to message me, asking for electrical advice, as her outdoor socket was no longer operating as expected. Apparently, Louise has plugged in a string of festoon lights, and when turned off, said luminaires remain dimly aglow, as she herself shows in this accompanying picture, which presumably is blurry because of the grease on her lens from her phone being in the kitchen too much while she's been broiling bacon in bulk. Such a fault can be down to only one thing. The switch on the socket isn't fully opening when it has been thrown into the off position. Instead, there must be a high resistance path remaining through the switch, which is allowing some current to flow to the lights, causing them to remain partially illuminated when they're supposed to be off. So it would seem what we have here is a mechanical fault with the socket outlet itself. I remind you, Nigel and I were only tasked with relocating the exterior outlet Louise has obviously owned for years. We neither supplied nor replaced it when we were there the previous summer. This exterior socket is old and weathered, but 11 months earlier it passed inspection and testing and was still in a serviceable condition. Its failure now may be attributed to years of wear and tear and would have happened regardless of whether or not we'd monkeyed with the fucker. Confucius says, shit's had its time, shit's time is up. So, in June of 2024, Linda and I returned to Louise's grief hole by appointment to find her not at home. Presumably she'd run out of pucker pies and was urgently seeking a quantity discount at the nearest cash and carry. So while she filled her trolley at Costco, her husband answered the door, seemingly knowing nothing about why two tired, old, yet, dare I say, good-looking electricians were darkening his doorstep while wrinkling our noses at the smell wafting from within from what must have been cabbage boiling on the stove or something. Once I'd explained why Linda and I had dragged our wrinkled noses and our surprisingly pert arses over to a county we wouldn't normally be seen dead frequenting, we were admitted past the threshold and across this sore-stained carpet through to the garden, where, despite intrepid efforts, we were unable to replicate the fault Louise had oinked on about. With our tester connected, the socket and switch worked according to expectations. Live went on, dead went off, and not a sausage of voltage in between. As already stated, such a fault could only be down to a dicky switch on the socket outlet itself. Nothing else is going to explain Louise's lights emitting a feeble glow when the socket switch is off. And remember, her existing exterior outlet was old and weathered. Fortunately, it was of such a model where one can swap out the faceplate without having to replace the whole sodding shebang. So I grabbed a new faceplate off the van, and within minutes Linda had it installed and zipped back up. We actually spent longer having a chinwag with Louise's husband, who, like Linda, had spent time in South Africa, and they were both talking of life back in the old country, which sounds horrendous to be fair, and which is why they both now live here in Blighty, where there are no guns or crime. At least, not in civilised areas outside of London or Birmingham, which are vermin-infested shitholes. Again, an invoice was rightly tossed off into Louise's massive face. Even if we hadn't been able to replicate the fault that day, a dicky faceplate switch could be all that it was, so confidence was high that all would now be well. Problem solved, fault fixed, new outlet now under a 2-year warranty. Oh, and it was a favourably priced invoice too. Not even the standard call-out rate seems it was such a simple in-and-out job, and again, we want to keep Nick's customer sweet because nobody likes the wrath of an angry landscaper. They might do something nuts like rip up your tarmac driveway and replace it with 80s fashion crazy paving, or install a koi water feature into the middle of your lawn that you'd be obliged to then maintain and keep the herons away from, or staple a load of shit really shonkily onto your outside wall that... Oh, wait, I might be thinking of Octopus EV installers rather than landscapers there. I don't know. And anyway, okay, sure, we're out of pocket for the time and diesel, but a minimum charge invoice will cover our basic expenses, so you'd think Louise would be happy enough to put down her pipe of Pringles and packet of Pop-Tarts to promptly pay and pen some positive praise. Or I think I need a pee again. While I do that, you listen to what Miss Piggy actually did ignorantly oink into this email.
Hi David, thank you for your email. Whilst I'm happy the issue with the socket has been resolved, I won't be paying an additional bill. The price for the job was agreed and paid for last year. Kind regards, Louise.
Oh, Christ. I do appreciate a good piss. At my age, it's better than sex, second only to dropping the work trousers for a good, hard, satisfying, booze-soaked bloody stool in the morning before zipping everything back up and climbing onto the van. I'm sorry, where were we? Oh, yes, Fatty Batty's reticence to swallow my invoice, presumably because it wasn't coated in chocolate and smelling of nougat. Nigel and I had simply moved her own existing outdoor socket 11 months prior. It wasn't a part we had supplied, nor did we leave it in a non-working condition when we fucked off down the pub afterwards. Had it been something we'd sourced or a failure due to our workmanship as a direct result of our having relocated it, then it would have been covered under my 24-month no-quibble warranty, although technically Louise wasn't even eligible for that, as my term states such only applies when invoices have been paid in full within 5 calendar days of issue, and Louise didn't fat finger her way through the online card payment until a reminder landed over a week after the original invoice got lost among her Deliveroo e-receipts. So when her shit later went tits up, I was under no obligation to do a goddamn thing. But try explaining that to someone who's too busy cramming jam donuts into her toothless blowjob hole. Louise thinks paying us to simply move something that we never supplied and which has already seen years of service means we now take on the warranty for its operation for free and, presumably, forever. It's akin to having a mechanic examine the wheel of the car you idiotically curbed while trying to change the radio station, then complaining after nearly 12 months that you now have a puncture, which obviously must be the mechanic's fault, so you expect a new tyre for free. I'd imagine any branch of QuickFit would retort with 2 fingers and a loud, fuck you fatso, and that should come as no surprise to anyone with more than a dozen brain cells and a soupçon of common sense. One day Louise will need the services of a reputable electrician. Her 16th edition electrical installation shows no sign of recent maintenance, and eventually something she depends upon, while having spent nothing on upkeep, will lead to more urgent issues. So what's better for Louise when her freezer full of Finder's crispy pancakes is unexpectedly defrosting? Keeping handy the deets of the guy she already knows and can trust to turn up, or pissing him off so he can tell World Plus Dog to steer clear of her rotund rump and speedily thawing turkey Twizzlers? Okay, so perhaps you think I've been a little rude about Louise here, but let me make something plain. Louise isn't a dissatisfied customer boldly and rightly refusing to throw up, payment, that is, not a lunch, because she perceives she hasn't had the goods, services, or value for money she's being billed for. On the contrary, Louise is naught but a common thief. Louise stole the time of both me and Linda, along with our expertise, the diesel it took to travel to her grease-ridden shit pit and back, plus the new part we supplied and fitted to rectify the fault. And yet she figured she wouldn't fork out for any of it out of some misguided principle of being wronged, even when it was explained that the fault wasn't of our making and wasn't on equipment we had ever provided in the first fucking place. Louise is too dull to understand we could have ignored her entirely and gone on to better paid jobs that day to earn our living, although we instead chose to do her a favour because that's the kind of stand-up people we are. As for the bill on this occasion, well, I told you we did her a favour. Even ignoring the cost of the diesel and the part we'd supplied, the invoice amount would only have kept me and Linda in regular-sized cappuccinos for less than a week, so yeah, it's not like it was a bank breaker. To put that into terms Louise could comprehend with her limited intellect, the bill was equivalent to a 12-piece KFC sharer bucket for one, with 3-litre non-diet Pepsi, extra fries, popcorn chicken, a selection of dips and a side salad she'd have thrown in the bin. So an average Monday lunchtime for Louise then. From my experience, the dickheads who don't want to pay often eventually come crawling back asking for help when the shit hits the fan and they've nobody else to call. Well, all the best with that, Louise, you porky bimboid.
David, I really think this video is racist against we more rotund people. You ought to have more empathy considering your own beer-bellied portly frame.
Fuck off, Sam. I'm not in the mood for your woke nonsense, you dickless bubblehead.